The first episode of the Dusk Maiden of Amnesia starts with Momoe Okonogi, who is seen in the Paranormal Investigation Club. Okonogi is keeping a small journal. She carries it around with her to write down notes about the unconfirmed reports and ghost stories that pique her attention. She ends up splitting her pencil tip and striking her cat charm. That cat charm begins to move as it searches her bag for a sharpener. Then Okonogi is mostly talking to herself and composing notes, and whenever she looks away, something else starts moving. The keychain flies into her face, but she doesn't notice, and her teacup hovers, but she doesn't notice. Finally, she reaches for her tea and notices that it has been moved, and she acknowledges that there's a ghost in the room, which is when Teiichi enters. Okonogi begins telling him that there's a ghost in the room, and from the look on his face, it appears that he already knows. Teiichi attempted to pacify Okonogi, but something was interfering. In some instances, you can hear Teiichi speaking to someone other than Okonogi, but Okonogi believes he's performing some sort of ritual because apparently random things start to happen to him as well. That's when Kirie wanders in. They all start talking, and we can hear Kirie talking to herself, so Okonogi becomes bamboozled. Thus, they begin their investigation. Concerning the elevator, some rumors claim that the elevator continues to move even though it's no longer used by the school, and that if it catches you, you'll be sent to the criminal underground. So what happens next? Teiichi is pushed into it. Yuko is seen whacking Teiichi, so Kirie and Okonogi go to the floor where the elevator has stopped to pick up Teiichi. The episode then returns to the beginning to show what actually occurred. Yuko, it turns out, is the cause of everything. Yuko is the ghost. So basically, the entire episode is replayed with Yuko in the picture. It's kind of amusing. She does these sort of things because she's attracted to Teiichi and only wants to be with him. Teiichi asks her about her loneliness and why she's doing all this, but since Yuko has no memory of her past, she can't answer his questions. Finally, Yuko persuades Teiichi to touch her breast when the door opens, only for Okonogi and Kirie to see. Okonogi, on the other hand, is the only one who cannot see Yuko. Then the investigation team gets together and heads to a hill, where they discover Yuko's grave. Okonogi goes off, saying that the person who made this tomb must have adored Yuko, which upsets Yuko, who widens her eyes and kicks over the grave, causing Okonogi to go insane. Finally, Teiichi stated that Yuko is the subject of the first ghost story in the school, and Yuko is the one who has been trying to possess him, and the episode ends at that. The second episode begins with Teiichi explaining how he understood everything. Then he discovers a door that leads to the club room. He looks around, starts mumbling stuff to himself, and out of nowhere, a mirror appears in front of him. Yuko appears and scares him. They both decide to take a stroll around the school. Yuko asks him all sorts of questions. Then suddenly, Teiichi starts getting a series of visions and memories in his head, along with the dinging of a bell. Despite these visions, Teiichi continues to walk with her. Yuko tells him that she suffers from amnesia, and that she holds no grudges or regrets. Also, she kisses Teiichi on the forehead so that he is forever marked. To her, this means that he will never be able to forget her now. Teiichi asks her if she wants to start tormenting him, and she walks away telling him a story. That's pretty odd. In any case, she tries to explain that there's a story about a girl who died on school grounds and her body is still at the school, and that the entire campus is tormented. Teiichi inquires if the story is about her, to which she responds, maybe. He begins to wonder if her body is still alive, and he experiences those visions once more. In one of his visions, a strange voice says, no matter what happens, if you stand directly in front of it, don't look over your shoulder. Because if you do, the ghost will draw you in and snare you in the mirror forever. So while this voice is saying this, the entire first and second episodes begin to play backward. You think that's a little creepy? When Yuko appears in front of the stairs, creepy, and says, you saw it even though I told you not to. She sits there singing and crying, saying that Teiichi had seen all of her body. Then the episode returns with Teiichi exploring the history of the school. He explains that the school was built on top of a mountain where there used to be a grave. Turns out he was reading a book about the school. Weird, right? Then Yuko starts to mess around with him. She falls on top of him and asks him to touch her. Then Okonogi walks in. She tells Teiichi that Yuko's ghost is trying to kill her, leaving both Teiichi and Yuko surprised. Okonogi asks Teiichi for assistance with her problem, and Teiichi loses his cool and asks Yuko what to do. Okonogi, on the other hand, can't see Yuko. All she sees is Teiichi speaking to himself. Okonogi continues to walk away from the classroom, her charm flying off her hand. The paper's turned over to reveal a piece of homework. She has now discovered that the charm is a forgery. When she looks up, she sees the ghost. Honestly, this jump scare got me. Teiichi tracks her down and grabs her, trying to flee. The music becomes more intense and shit gets real. When Teiichi pulls out the real charm and reveals it to Okanogi, the spirit appears. Yuko says something in a hushed tone and the episode ends. In this episode, Teiichi receives a letter, which is a request for him to meet the sender, and it has something to do with Yuko. Teiichi arrives at the meeting point. As it turns out, the sender is Kirie. Teiichi is warned to avoid Yuko by her. She's a cursed ghost who will take Teiichi away if he lets his guard down. Teiichi recalls Yuko's comment about people seeing her in a different manner. He begins to doubt himself and believes that while he sees Yuko as a pretty girl, she may actually be a beast. As it rains, Yuko appears ahead of Teiichi. She was waiting for him in the room the entire time. Anyway, her clothes get wet from the rain, so the two go to the infirmary to dry off. Yuko is relieved that Teiichi sees what she sees in the mirror. The mysterious miniskirted girl then appears and explains the Yuko she sees. Petering dark hair, rotten skin, perverted scowl, drooping old lady poops. She dares Teiichi to look at Yuko now, and his opinion of her has shifted. Teiichi is saved by the mysterious girl from the now ugly as hell Yuko and shows who she really is. She is Kirie. She's a relative of Yuko. She initially saw Yuko as the lovely, pale maiden Teiichi sees, but one day she began to see Yuko in her true, grotesque form. When Yuko catches up to them, Teiichi discusses Yuko's dead body with Kirie. The pair flee. Teiichi transports Kirie to the location of Yuko's body. She's about to open the stairs. Kirie becomes terrified and runs away to the basement, of all places. Yuko requests that Teiichi looks at her, but he's reluctant. She admits that she became much happier when she finally met someone who could see her. She appreciates the time she spent with Teiichi. Teiichi prevents Yuko from deciding to leave him and resumes everyday interactions with her. But in order for Teiichi to better understand Yuko, he needs to get a close look at her skeleton, which Yuko, still completely nude, tries to prevent Teiichi from doing. Teiichi enters the basement and sees Kirie sobbing. He examines Yuko's corpse with her and discovers that her leg is cracked. Kirie then points to something. It's a temple, which confirms rumors that the school was built on top of a shrine. Kirie begins to have second thoughts about Yuko being haunted as the two rise again. Things appear to be returning to normal, but Yuko still dislikes Kirie. Momoe returns to the club room sometime after the past events to share her findings about Yuko's story. It turns out that the school was cursed because it was built over a shrine, so the problem wasn't a wretched girl, but a wretched school. This completely alters everything. Kirie appears and informs her intention to join their team in the most tsundere way possible. In the fourth episode, we get to see that the Paranormal Investigations Club is at the summer training camp. Yuko seems to be watching everyone from afar. When the kids are settling in, Momo discovers an old journal and starts reading from it. The journal happened to contain a few striking stories about the guard who used to hear knocking sounds. Things start to get serious at the club. Momo didn't want to leave the area. She wanted to stay behind so she could hear the knocking sounds. When Teiichi and Kirie head out to explore, Kirie reveals that she set up this training night to discover the ghost she thought was Yuko. Yuko snatches Teiichi and gets mad at him for ditching her during the summers. Then Teiichi touches Yuko's hand. When they all return to the room, they discover that it's locked. Yuko knocks on the door. A stumbling noise comes from the inside. Kirie and Teiichi run to enter through the back window, only to discover Momo trying to escape the room. Momo thought that it was a mysterious ghost knocking, so she decided to flee. Then, when everyone was attempting to sleep, Yuko and Teiichi sneak out. Kirie notices them. Yuko wants Teiichi to assist her in her search for the damned stone. According to the legend, there's a stone in the old school tower that if your name is written on it, you'll be doomed to die. And it appears that they've discovered it. And to Teiichi's sheer horror, he discovers his own name there, only for Yuko to confess that it was all a joke. At that same moment, Yuko describes how curses are just everyday things that are exaggerated because people are afraid of them. There's no curse knocking, noise, or stone, only Yuko being crafty and pulling pranks. And now with that, the episode concludes. This episode begins with Kirie's dialogue asking why, but then you see what appears to be Yuko dressed as a maid. Yes, it's time for the school festival. Teiichi is seen setting up a haunted house on Yuko's request. After knowing what Teiichi has been up to, Kirie gets mad. So Kirie pulls Okanogi by the wrist and tries to drag her out, enraged at Teiichi. She continues walking because she's so enraged that Okanogi had to scream to get her to stop, and they become lost. Kirie wants to go to the old science room to find items to embellish the haunted house with, which is exactly what Okanogi wants to do, but she's told to stop. Okanogi tries to explain that going in there is dangerous due to the cold-hearted anatomical model. Kirie unlocks the door and Okanogi shrieks as she begins to explain. The story goes that the models go out at night looking for their missing hearts. When the janitor was working at night, he felt the presence of someone behind him. He turns around and comes to know that it was the model. The janitor dies that next morning, with his heart cut out. After finding the heart, Kirie and Okanogi look for the heart model, but they aren't able to find it. Somehow the girls manage to get over it. Then Kirie dresses up for some sort of an 80s montage show. After staring at herself in the mirror, Kirie realizes that she looks exactly like Yuko. To this, she becomes sad and storms off. Unknowingly, she walks right into the haunted house. Then Yuko asks Kirie if she hates herself, because she looks like her. Kirie starts to yell at her and says that she does not want to look like her because she's dead. Then Kirie runs out of the haunted house and eventually bumps into Teichi. She asks Teichi why he likes Yuko so much, to which he replies, "When it comes to love, I don't care if another person is a ghost." As a result of his response, Kirie bursts out laughing. Yuko then unlocks the door, and Kirie tries to push her out of the way before closing it behind her. So Kirie tells herself that what she saw in the room was really not Yuko, but rather what she was afraid of. It was the half of herself that was incapable of loving herself. In the 6th episode, the Paranormal Investigators Club gets to know about a rumor about Akahito, a masked blood-covered beast who murders anyone who stays late at school as penance as the school carnival continues. When Akahito is discovered during the festival, the rumor becomes true. The superstitious students are enraged after a student named Yuko Kirishima complains that she was attacked by Akahito. Teichi, on the other hand, discovers Kirishima was behind the Akahito story because she wants to eradicate ghost stories because the students bully her because she has the same name as the Grim Reaper Yuko. Kirishima tells her puritanical friends that the only way she can prevent Akahito from trying to kill them is to sacrifice Yuko the ghost, but they are neurotic and hysterical, choosing to believe that she and Yuko are the same person. The club deters puritanical students by having Yuko cover up herself as Akahito, who hunts down the students for offering the incorrect sacrifice. Kirishima tends to leave, but not before saying sorry to Yuko for her ordeal. Meanwhile, Momoe and Kirie leave the bell tower after scaring the superstitious students, until Kirie is confronted by the shadow ghost. The episode ends after that. Teichi observes Yuko acting strangely, as she unwittingly continues to lash out whenever he spends some time with Momo. He tells Kirie about it, and she tells him she saw the ghost again, leading him to believe the shadow ghost is the darkened half of Yuko's literal spirit character. Soon after, Teichi, Yuko, and Kirie are approached by the shadow ghost, who reveals to them that she is the embodiment of Yuko's hatred and the hurtful memories she wished to forget. Denying the truth, Yuko flees towards the Stone of Curse, where Teichi eventually finds her. It is clarified that Yuko was offered as a living sacrifice to stop the plague after it was disclosed that it was a memorial stone devoted solely to the townspeople who died in a pestilence 60 years ago. The shadow ghost reappears for the second time, revealing that Yuko was made as a sacrifice against her will. Yuko hangs out with Teichi the next day, but she is much more silent. To Yuko's horror, the shadow ghost acquires her and pushes Teichi down a stairwell. When healed and wrapped in bandages, Teichi returns to the club room. He's surprised to see Yuko, who doesn't seem to remember his face. Yuko informs Teichi to leave her alone, choosing to believe that she has forgiven him for causing her distress. Kirie comes to the conclusion that whenever Yuko has a traumatic memory, it is removed from her mind and cast into her shadow. Unable to bear noticing Yuko doesn't recognize him, he spends so much time with Momoe that he can no longer see Yuko. Kirie confronts him, asking if he's simply going to forget Yuko when she is strangely pushed away from him. Teichi recalls Yuko and his emotions for her after speaking with Momoe and trying to read her logbook about the club. He hurries to the club room and pulls Yuko to her favorite spot, telling her about the time they spent together and confessing his love for her. Yuko finally recalls who Teichi is and expresses her feelings for him. When the shadow ghost appears in the club room, Kirie discovers an old picture of Yuko and realizes it was the one who pushed her away previously. In an unexpected turn, the shadow ghost asks Kirie what she is. The episode ends at that. The shadow ghost reaches Kirie but is chased away by Momoe, who arrives just in time. She tells them about her interaction with Yuko and Teichi, but to their surprise, Yuko says she has never met her shadow and is unaware of the school's conundrums. They quickly notice Yuko has preferentially pushed her bad memories back into her shadow after noticing she has become more obstinate and ashamed than before. Yuko's upset and lonely without Teichi as the club returns home, and she has a brief flashback to her past. The shadow ghost appears in front of Yuko, disliking her for instilling their bad memories in her and being vehemently jealous that Teichi loves her. Teichi saves Yuko from the shadowy ghost's attempt to make her remember more of her history. They attempt to flee the school, but Yuko is unable to leave the premises. Teichi tries to push Yuko away from her shadow when it tries to grab her, but as a direct consequence, he falls unconscious. Teiichi awakens to find himself seeing Yuko's past through her body. Teiichi travels back in time to Yuko's life, where she resided with her sister, Yukiko, Kirie's grandmother. Notwithstanding the fact that a plague was massacring the townspeople, Yuko proceeded to take care of Asa, a beautiful girl whose family had been killed by the curse, believing that everything would get better. Yukiko and Yuko, on the other hand, overhear a meeting among the sickening town heads, who believe that the pestilence is a punishment from the gods for constructing the school over a destructed shrine. To please the gods, the elders intend to surrender a young child and conceal the fact that the child was a victim of the pestilence. Then, Yukiato and Yuko bring Asa to their home out of concern for her safety, but Asa is abducted while the sisters are bathing, and Yuko rushes to the school to save her. Asa, who is compelled to play the role of Akahito to select a sacrifice, unwittingly chooses Yuko. The enraged elders seize Yuko and toss her into the buried shrine, sealing the entry. Yuko dies peacefully as she bleeds from a fractured leg, and her cries for help go unaddressed. Unwilling to blame anyone for her fate, and relieved that Asa and Yukiko are safe. This, however, results in the birth of Yuko's shadow, who despises her for not trying to blame anyone, including the elders, for her death, and becomes a ghost with her. Teiichi awakens from his fantasy of Yuko's past to discover that very little time has managed to pass in the present. Touching Teiichi's hand brings back images of her, and Yuko is unable to perceive or hear him. Teiichi considers giving up, but is smacked by Kirie for attempting to forget Yuko. Teiichi gets an idea from Momoe to ask Kirie to let him view Yukiko, the school's chairman, while communicating with Yuko through the club's logbook. Yukiko tells Teiichi that she too can see the shadow ghost and the elders who died from insanity after seeing it. Teiichi uses this information to entice Yuko to see him again by desecrating the club room, which also tends to attract the shadow ghost. Teiichi tells Yuko's shadow that he saw the history when he touched her, but she confronts him angrily, asking how he can understand her suffering and sorrow. Teiichi admits that watching what transpired to her and being powerless to intervene hurt him a lot. Regardless, he recognizes the Ghost Maiden because they are the same girl he absolutely adores. Both personas rationalize and merge, accepting both their positive and negative memories. Later, Teiichi discloses that Asa is his grandmother, based on what Yukiko told him. Yuko proclaims with joy that her sacrifice was not in desperation because it allowed her to meet him. Winter arrives and the club comes to know that Yukiko was discovered and properly buried her sister's body. Yuko arranges for Teiichi to go on a date around the school while the club room is closed until the school can relocate the holy site from the basement. Teiichi begins to wonder why Yuko is so adamant about this date until he discovers the truth. Her loathing, the regret that kept her spirit on Earth, has been settled, and her spirit is passing on to the afterworld. Teiichi bids farewell to Yuko and smooches her goodbye as they spend their final moments together in the club room. As the new school year begins in the early summer, the club learns that the school's historic building will not be torn down. Teiichi enters the club room, where Yuko appears much to his delight, as their last kiss made her regret having to leave him, and she is in his debt. In the last episode, we see that Kirie, exhausted of Yuko's hijinks for scattering more ghost stories among the students, confronts her with a sequence of games in which if Yuko fails, she must start behaving. Yuko wins the competition, much to Kirie's chagrin. Momoe displays an old letter she discovered containing ghost stories that predate Yuko's enlistment in the Paranormal Investigations Club at the school. The club decides to look into the stories one by one, which results in many amusing and embarrassing brief seconds for everyone. The club discovers that the letter was written in disappearing ink by the Paranormal Investigations Club after trying to investigate the haunted bath story. Momoe then recognizes that the original Paranormal Investigations Club wrote the stories for fun, before becoming the third newspaper club. Teiichi and the ladies decide to wear yukatas and set off firework displays on the school rooftops that evening, having realized they are just like their predecessors. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you at the next one.